In this video, we're going to explore the idea that all systems are inherently flawed, and yet we need them. And so we're going to look at systems at a number of different levels, and then look at how the innate flaws in the system compounds at each level of system thinking and system experiencing, including the system of reality. So we see the flaw in this system because we see the system in the flaw of muscle contraction. There's a system of reaction to this little nose itch, and the system is flawed. In other words, the system of the nose itch and the spasm reveals a flaw in the throat, reveals a strain in the shoulder, reveals a discomfort here in my face. So you could say this is part of the flaw in the system of diet. So we're going to work with this because it fits nicely you can see there's a system flaw in the discrepancy between culture and physicality. We have noses that itch and need to be blown, but we have a culture that says don't blow your nose in public. And so to try and get this discrepancy in the system to fit, we're supposed to do this over. In other words, to pretend that people don't blow their noses, pause the video, redo it all, to mask the flaw in the system. In this case, there's nothing wrong with the system of the body getting something out that it needs to get out. There's nothing wrong with a sneeze in order to do so. You see, because I initially tried to buck the system of my body to conform to the system of presentation. So my body has a system that tells me my nose is starting to itch. It'd be really great if I could blow my nose right now. And then my mind says there's a system of video creation that says we don't do that on video. Well, those systems don't fit. So this is another problem with all systems. All systems are flawed, and all systems fit in a flawed way with other systems. Another flawed system. You're not supposed to clear your throat in confident delivery. So the system of presenting a confident delivery is at odds with the system of giving a talk after eating a bagel. So what we're dealing with is also the system of desire and the system of allergens. So we're dealing with multiple systems and they don't fit, because the system of desire says that of everything in the house today, what I desire is a bagel. Now, the system of stress, which is a flawed system, meaning I have a flawed system of stress, which means that I have a flawed system of sleep, which means that I have a flawed system of energy, which means that I'm more susceptible to the allergies, in this case, wheat. So and then I have a flawed system of thinking about this. So that's really what we're going to explore in this video, is the descent from grace, the totality, the synergy, the unity of the sphere, of the one, into the refraction from the feminine and refracted into the masculine with distinctions, with system, with lines, with partitions, with words, with paradigms, with cultures. The refraction of the one into many, into two, into many. The descent from the feminine into the masculine, and the geometrical challenge of refracting an infinite ecology, an infinite synergy, into a series of systems and thoughts that we are capable of holding, but which are not capable of holding the complexity of reality. Meaning we, through the phenomena of human consciousness, refract reality into a series of distinctions that we are capable in our limited consciousness of holding. For example, can you hold a 10-digit number? 6, 3, 2, 8, 9, 5, 64, 237, 90, and 1. Can you hold a 10-digit number? Well, whether you can or whether you cannot, most people could not reliably repeat that 10-digit, those 10 sets of numbers. Whether you can and whether you cannot, they are completely inadequate to capture even a tiny speck of the totality of reality of which we are a part. And so we refract the totality and the whole into a series of distinctions that we are capable of holding in consciousness, but which are not capable of holding the totality of reality in grace. And herein lies the first problem. The first problem is the infinite sphere. It's hard for the human brain to refract that even into 1 million lines, because that's how you compose a sphere in a computer, through the masculine dynamic, in which everything in life is a wave or a particle, depending on the lens through which you look. The subatomic level, energy takes a masculine or feminine form in dynamic participation with the observer. A sphere refracted into 1 million planes, into 1 million dots, does not have the grace, does not have the symmetry, the complexity, the symmetry of a sphere refracted into 1 billion dots, into 1 billion billion dots, into 1 billion 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 lines and dots. But it is way beyond the limited capacity of human consciousness to create and hold such distinctions in consciousness. So really what we're looking at is the flawed system of human consciousness as a simple system, a system capable of holding a relatively small number of variables, tries to interact with a system that has an infinite number of variables, or at least many trillions of times more than the number of variables we're able to hold in consciousness. It's very much like a finger trying to interact with a hand. Because we have one connection port into 5 different locations, we create a lineal sequence. We create lineal time because the one is smaller than that which it is relating to. You see, if we create 5 connection points to 5 connection points, there is no time. It's all simultaneous. If you have 100 million screens and each screen plays a moment in a DVD, there is no time. It's all simultaneous. When you create a smaller or simpler connection point in relation to a larger or more complex connection point, you create the experience of time, because you cannot connect with everything and everything all at once. So when we refract human consciousness, which begins with language, so this is the first flaw. You take the entirety of all that is and you reduce it to 64,000 words. Now, there's 2 flaws in language. One is reality is infinitely more complex than language. 2, language only relates to that which is observable and measurable through the paradigm of senses. So, if there is light that is above the range of the human eye, that's the best language we can do for it. Above the range of the human eye. Well, is it above? Why isn't it horizontal in relationship to the human eye? Why isn't it below the range? Why isn't it beside the range? You see, it's meaningless. It's outside of the purview of consciousness, of our consciousness. Now, we have language to allude to it, but it's meaningless. What does it sound like to hear the literally trillions of sound that are below the range that your ear can hear? You can't relate to it. So the first flaw in language is that the 64,000 words of which we use relatively few only relate to the narrow bandwidth of reality that we can observe and measure. They do not relate to the entirety of reality, which is a trillion times bigger than what these little senses can measure. And I'm not just talking about the problem where what these senses can measure are infinitesimal on the dimensions that they're measuring. So if we take light measured by the human eye, okay, so what do we have? We have color, we have shape, we have texture, we have patterns, but these eyes aren't very good at measuring patterns. And to give you a sense of that, you cannot tell me how many right angles you observed in the last 30 minutes through these eyes. Now, an acutely tuned sense could do that, meaning you could train a computer to scan with similar resolution to the human eye and measure right angles. And you could take a computer through the day and it would say 21,000 right angles were above 1 inch in the day. 687 right angles were smaller than 1 inch in that day. The computer can be attuned to that, but we're not. If we attune to that, we come up with the problem of the chimpanzee dribbling basketball, right? When you tell someone to focus on something, they miss massive events in their reality because they're in a zoomed-in state of consciousness. I want you to count the number of bounces of the ball. You're watching the ball. You don't notice that a chimpanzee walks in and walks off again. I was counting the ball. And so we have the first flaw in language is we're only measuring that which is within the domains of our five senses. And of course, that becomes a secondary problem that our five senses do not measure the entirety of energy on even those dimensions. But what about the dimension of who? We measure four dimensions: space, time, height, length, width. That's what we measure because we've got observing and measuring devices on those dimensions. But what about all of the dimensions to the left and right, below and above? The domains that we have observing and measuring devices. We have no sense of that either. So we measure relatively few dimensions amongst an enormous possibility field of dimensions, an enormous probability field of dimensions, an enormous actuality of dimensions. We measure very few. On those dimensions, we measure a very narrow bandwidth of energy, and then we notice about half of what we observe and measure in our body, and we put that into language. But we're using 64,000 words in different combinations to locate consciousness, ideas, memories in that plane. And you can see the artificial distinction, the artificial truncation of words, because when you understand that everything is an ecological holograph, is an ecological synergy, when you understand that this finger has things in common with Mars, then you also understand that we don't default to the type of consciousness that sees that. And the reason is language. Because the word finger does not say, if you look under the word finger, it doesn't say series of atoms, 1, held within the law of physics, 2, cohering in a predictable pattern, 3, that is bound by the same gravitational force on Mars. That's not the definition of a finger. You see, the definition of a word defines how connected that bit of energy is with all the other energy in the ecosphere. Now, there are physiological connections between this finger and Mars, between this finger and this finger, between this finger and your finger, between this finger and the farthest particles observable in our galaxy, in our universe. There are connections. One of them is gravity. There is a habit in nature that we have defined as gravity. It is the habit for large masses to attract other masses to them. So you could say that reality has a habit of drawing objects together, and that the largest mass of reality tends to draw the smallest mass of reality to it, rather than the smallest mass of reality drawing the largest reality. And if you took that down to a sociological level, you could say that large groups tend to attract lone individuals more than lone individuals tend to attract groups by habit. We see it over and over again with a predictable level of consistency. Now, this could be a conscious mind. There could be a reason why large groups of energy attract small groups of energy that could be analyzed and understood in practical terms. Now, let's say that you are a lone individual, and as a lone individual, you want to look at the possibility field of your life. Do you want a big possibility field? Do you want a small possibility field? That's a tough question, isn't it? Because it depends on what you believe. If the world is a scary place, you want a small possibility field, because the more scary it is and the bigger it is, the more scared you are. Because the law of mass dictates that if a large object collides with you, a small object, in a hostile paradigm, the law of mass says that you will be blown out of the water. You'll be decimated as a small shape in a large shape. The law of mass dictates that when a pinball collides with a bowling ball, the bowling ball absorbs the small energy of the pinball and carries on its relative trajectory minus the energy of the pinball. The pinball goes flying off in a completely new direction, bouncing off the momentum of energy created by a larger mass. And this is what happens when individuals collide with groups. So, if you don't want to experience massive disruption and shock, don't collide with groups is one message. So what do you do with groups if you don't collide with them? And if you want a big possibility field, your geometrics go up mathematically when you connect with more people. The more variables in a system, the more elements in a system, the more variables of the outcome, right? Because if you have just a light bulb, but no battery and no wires, no switch, you don't get light. You have a light bulb, but you don't get light. If you're a light bulb, the odds of all kinds of things happening, for better or worse, go up when you connect with more variables. And amongst those variables might be a battery, a couple of wires, and light. So to realize the greatest potential leverage requires interconnectivity. To increase the possibility field involves engaging with complexity. Engaging with more variables increases the possibility field of outcomes, geometrically, not linearly. When you have 5 individual particles or items and you connect a 6th, you do not add one more unit. You create a possibility field that is every one of those variables. It's like a digit. If you have a 5-based number system and you go to a 6-based number system, so you just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1 teen, 2 teen, 3 teen, 4 teen, 5 teen. And then 2020, well, whatever the language would be, to just so that you repeat. You've got a smaller set with just 5. So 5 times 5 is 25. If you're using multiples, you get 25. Now, if you can play with the variables, though, you can create a lot of different digits. If you can expand beyond 5 numbers, you can add zeros after the 5s, and 2, 1, 5, 3, 6, or you can't go over 5. But you can get quite large as a possibility field, going from 4 numbers to 5. So the addition of one person to a group of 5 expands the possibility field exponentially. Now, we're all drawn, as human beings, all of reality is drawn as a breath, as a movement, as a dance, towards feeling sustainably better and avoiding feeling chronically worse. And there's our words connected with those feelings: grace, beauty, excellence, truth, goodness, joy, happiness, balance, sustainability, abundance, possibilities, expansion, contraction, polarity. There are so many words associated with that feeling of good. I want to feel sustainably better. I want to avoid feeling chronically worse. There are ways to do that. They begin by expanding the possibility field, which is a neutral expansion, admittedly, because when you expand the possibility field, it's in all directions. If you add one person to the group, you increase the leverage that something bad could happen. If you add a bit of C4 to 2,000 parts in a car, well, what if someone lights a cigarette right next to that C4? And then kaboom, all of the transportation potential of all those different parts lost. There are other possibility fields that open up other than transportation. But as you add something to the mix, does it liberate? Does it reconnect us with that sense of possibility, of goodness, of feeling better? Or does it destroy it? And that is the question. As an instinct, however, one must first expand the possibility field. And then one must learn mastery, how to create more and more sustainable well-being within that larger possibility field. And here we come into the limits of human consciousness. How aware and masterful are we with what series of energies in what formations at what intensities? So the same energy that leads to this conversation leads to a lawnmower interrupting the flow in a moment in time.